Welcome again to the three-part webinar series we've been having over the last couple of weeks. As you would recall, we started with barriers to accessing journals in the Global South. We were looking at last week at particularly an important issue, issues around racial disparities in publishing. This week, we've got what I would qualify as an innovative way of doing research, ensuring that we give voices and we give access to the marginalized academics. We're seeing, or rather trying to see how we can draw lessons from Karina and her colleagues, who founded a very novel way of working as a collective of academics who assist each other in peer reviewing the work that they're doing. Dr. Karina is a senior researcher at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in the Department of Human Behavior, Ecology, and Culture. We're here to hear more about what exactly you do. But she's co-founded many individuals, a global network of researchers with field sites to test hypotheses that involve generalizing across many individuals. What we're particularly interested today, Dr. Corina Logan, is the PCI. The moment is yours. You can share your screen and play the recording. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. Thanks for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to be here. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to share a video. It's a webinar that I gave, and all the information is like so spot on that I just used this video to help communicate what we're up to. And then once the video is over, it's 28 minutes, then I'll stop it and we can have a conversation, which I'm really looking forward to. So yeah, today I wanted to talk about how peer community and registry reports lets researchers take back control of the publishing process. And you might be asking, well, aren't we already in control of the publishing process? And I argue that academia, as we are currently structured and currently work, that's actually not the case. So I'll take you through a life cycle in first the exploitative route of an article and then the ethical route of an article. So here's me inside of academia, and I just got an article accepted at a journal that is subscription-based, so institutions pay annual fees for subscribing to be able to read these journals. And so I think, yay, I just published this article for free. And what I don't realize is that on my behalf, academia paid about $5,000 US for this article to be published. And that those profits, of which there are many because it costs almost nothing to host a PDF online, go to shareholders at these primarily 4 main publishers where almost all of our research articles are located. So for example, Elsevier is one of these publishers. They make about 50% profits, which is more than Google. And they're draining money from academia because they're publicly traded, which means they're on the stock market, and those profits are going to their shareholders. And that they're doing a great job of meeting their goal, which is to maximize profits, but it's in direct competition with academia's goal, which is to share research. So it's published behind a paywall, this article is, which means that it's available to read by the scholarly rich. If your institution has a subscription to this journal, you can read the research. If not, you can't. And what I think we don't often realize is that many researchers are at institutions who cannot afford any journal subscriptions or only a few journal subscriptions because they're so expensive. So we're discriminating against other researchers when we publish behind paywalls, as well as patients can't read the research, medical doctors can't read the research, and the public can't read the research. And it's the public who funds this research, so it's a broken life cycle loop. It's not a loop at all. There are a lot of ethical problems here. And so I want to set the ethical framework for conducting and evaluating research. And I think it's based on 3 pillars. And these pillars are that researchers and publishers have a responsibility to the public to provide them with free access to publicly funded products, which are a common good. And the second pillar is that publishers of research products have a responsibility to researchers to value the generation and packaging of knowledge. And the third pillar is that researchers have a responsibility to the public to conduct rigorous research because it serves as a foundation for the advancement of discoveries, it provides the best value for the money, and it earns public trust. Now, I argue that the ability to conduct and evaluate research depends on whether one can read, understand, and verify research, and whether anyone can generate and disseminate research in the system that we work in, regardless of their wealth, access to opportunity, perception of prestige, and evaluated implicit biases. So clearly we need to change how scholarly publishing works to be able to implement this ethical framework. And so I tried, right? So I was at Cambridge at the time that I got really interested in this, and I tried to change how scholarly publishing works there by a number of means. And University of Cambridge is 800 years old and has layer upon layer upon layer of bureaucracy. So, and everyone passes the buck and no one takes responsibility for anything, and no one will say yes, it's just a bunch of closed doors. So I was not successful there, which spurred the implementation of bullied into bad science, which the aim there was to put pressure on institutions from the top down. And so a few of us at Cambridge started Bullied into Bad Science, which is a campaign for and by early career researchers. So we often feel pressured into taking actions against our ethics to pursue an academic career. And so we wanted to lead individuals and institutions in adopting open practices to improve research rigor. And we do that by having early career researchers sign a petition where we're asking senior researchers and institutions to take 8 actions to incentivize open practices and allow us to improve our research rigor while also benefiting from being selected for in job and grant processes. So when I was doing this, I was learning all kinds of ways that people are bullied into bad science, because when people sign the petition, they can write anecdotes about how they're being told to make up data to get into a particular journal, and just all kinds of rampant scientific malpractice. That happens every day. So one question we got a lot was okay, we know how we don't want to do it, right? But how do we want to do it? What should I do? What should I tell people to do? And so we embarked on a venture for how do we do research ethically in academia. So here's the ethical route of an article. Here's me in the middle. I got an article accepted at a journal that's 100% open access. So it's free for people to read. And I choose how much money academia spends on my behalf to make this article published in this journal. Actually, most open access journals are free to publish in. Something like 70% are free to publish in. So if I want to pay money, I can, but that's my choice. It depends on the journal and how much they charge. But I choose where I put it. Now, the part about where the ethical publishers come in, it has to be a journal, a 100% open access journal at a publisher where the profits can contribute back into academia. So nonprofit publishers meet this criteria. Also, PeerJ for me meets this criteria. They are a for-profit corporation, but they give a lot back to academia, and they're trying to change how scholarly publishing works. Also, my lifetime membership there costs about $200 US, and I can publish in an unlimited number of articles there for this, and I never have to pay again. So it turns out it ends up being almost free the more articles I publish there. So these are the kinds of considerations to think about when you're looking at the publisher who's publishing the journal you're interested in. Now, the article is available to read by the public because it's open access, and articles that are open access have been shown to result in more readers, shocking, more citations, more media attention, and the authors benefit from more job opportunities and funding opportunities. Now, it's available to read by the public, by everyone, and the public funds the research. So this is kind of a closed life cycle. The money stays in academia. So there are more pieces to think about in the ethical route, and I ended up making recently a decision tree that goes with this article. So I just talked about open access journals. There are a couple of other things to think about as well. For instance, the article license, is it CC BY 4.0? This is the license that makes the research the most open and reusable. And it keeps it so that you are cited whenever someone uses your research. So they have to credit you in this copyright license. When you sign your copyright over to a publisher, you lose all rights to this, and people can't text or data mine or anything. So, and you can't even use your own figures a lot of times. So this is one consideration to think about. Another is whether the peer review history will be published alongside the article. So I was a reviewer in a confidential peer review process at a very well-respected journal in my field. And the reviewers did not think that this was an article that actually was even honest in a lot of places. It was published without really any changes, and it is considered a peer-reviewed piece of literature when in fact it wasn't. And after I had this experience, I decided I'm never going to do confidential peer review again. I want people to be able to judge the quality of the peer reviewers, the quality of the editor, and the quality of the authors and how well they responded to the concerns that were brought up. And then that also makes the process of the quality control of the science open, so that you can evaluate and do a meta-analysis when you have more and more open review histories at a variety of places. So then there are two pieces here that is the APC too high? So there are barriers to people to publish in journals, and one of them is cost, and one of them is whether the journal selects articles based on subjective impact or scientific validity, whether the scientific validity is whether the article is scientifically valid. If yes, accept. If not, reject. But subjective impact is dependent on the handling editor's opinion. Is this an important study? And it's been shown that this is a racist and sexist policy, as is charging fees to be part of academia. And so I encourage you to read How to Be an Anti-Racist, and So You Want to Talk About Race, as books to understand what racist and sexist policies are and what we can do in academia to become anti-racist, anti-sexist. And there's so much we can do. It's actually really exciting that we're at this time when we can change so much. So I'm going to, in a minute, tell you about a publishing process that solves all of these ethical problems. But first I want to talk about, how are these policies racist, sexist, that are built into the academia that we know. So selecting based on subjective impact and charging authors and readers money are racist and sexist policies. And the deal here is that the incentive structure is at odds with research rigor. So to get jobs and grants, researchers are often told to publish in high impact factor journals that select articles based on their subjective impact rather than scientific validity. And these journals are selecting articles that tell sexy stories. So this leads researchers to manipulate the story and the stats. So harking, hypothesizing after the results are known, and p-hacking, doing as many analyses as you can until you get a significant p-value, and then pretending like you originally thought that p-value was going to happen in that particular direction in the first place. And so people are doing this manipulation to make a sexy story to get it into these particular high impact factor journals, but it's been shown that this actually selects for bad science. So when we use and promote metrics like this, for instance, using the number of first author articles in high impact factor journals, when you're selecting successful grant applicants, or your next job hire, or your next students who get into your program, these metrics are making it that only the people with privilege get into the power positions in academia. And that's because people with more privilege are more likely to have access to opportunities that allow them to score higher on these metrics. And who's scoring higher on these metrics? Well, people who publish more in the more well-known journals are white, and people who score higher on the metrics are particularly men, who are perceived to have higher quality research than women. And it's been shown that men have more first author articles in high impact factor journals. And so it's the academia is selecting for it in these prestigious positions in academia. It's been shown that most faculty and most editors are white men from overprivileged countries, and that means like the US and the UK. So people who are inside academia here, they can afford to read, to pay to read and publish, and success is defined based on their experiences, and so that's why these racist and sexist policies continue. But there's so much we can do about this to take anti-racist and anti-sexist action. So I'll show you this difference here first about the equality versus equity argument. So we have on the left image here, it's assumed that everyone will benefit from the same supports. They are being treated equally. So you can see this person who's shorter and has the same size box to stand on as the other people can't see over the fence to watch the baseball game. In the second image, individuals are given different supports to make it possible for them to have equal access to the game. They're being treated equitably. So now the shorter person has two boxes to stand on and they can see over the fence to watch the baseball game. In the third image, all three can see the game without any supports or accommodations because the cause of the inequity was addressed. The systemic barrier has been removed. So the fence, the opaque fence is now gone and everyone can stand however tall they are and watch the game. So what we need to do is remove the barriers from academia that are created by money and perceived impact. And we can do this by selecting articles based on scientific validity, not subjective impact. For high impact venues, you can use double-blind peer review to address the prestige bias. And assess individual research quality. So this means focusing on the background of the person under consideration. Don't be colorblind because that is a form of racism. So what privileges, when you think about this person's background and how they grew up, what they experienced, what privileges did and didn't they have access to, and what did they do with the privileges and opportunities they did have access to? And you can sign and implement the San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment. And this is saying that I will not judge people, select people based on metrics. I will select them based on individual quality. And then make it free to participate in academia. So on that quick overview, I'm going to jump now into the ethical model that can address all the problems that we've encountered in the exploitative route of publishing. And that is peer community in. So it's a journal-style peer review where there's an editor and at least two reviewers of a preprint that's hosted at a preprint server. So if it's accepted, then PCI publishes the peer review history on their website, and the authors update the article at the preprint server, and that's the peer review version. Now, PCI is not a journal, so you can then submit this peer review preprint to a journal and ask to have an additional peer review waived. PCI is a researcher-run nonprofit organization, and they publish their economic model online. So you can see how much money they make from where. It's all donations, and where they spend the money as well. But the cool part is, so it's free for readers, it's free for authors. It costs almost nothing to run. So there's for each PCI, so there's a PCI, you can make a PCI in an area that you don't see one. So there's a PCI in evolutionary biology, a PCI in ecology, paleontology, etc. And if you want to have a PCI in your area, you can make one. But each PCI costs about 500 euros per year, and that's just for the website hosting and development. And then if you want to go and include travel expenses for promoting your PCI, you can. I don't, because I just do it as part of my everyday life. So it's really cheap to do the peer review of articles. So PCI already existed, and there was something missing, and that was registered reports. And so one of the great things about PCI is that if you have an innovation and you want to implement it, you can. And so I and some co-founders founded PCI in registered reports. So first, let me walk through what a registered report is for those who don't know. So you have a study plan, and you get that pre-study peer reviewed before you conduct your study. And if it passes the peer review there, then you get an in-principle acceptance. So you're basically guaranteed to have the post-study write-up accepted, given that you follow your plan. So then you get your in-principle acceptance, you conduct your study, you write the preprints, and then you submit it again for post-study peer review. and they just check to make sure that you followed your plan and that you're not overstating your results and conclusions, and then you have the final preprint. Now, register reports as an article type began in 2013. Chris Chambers implemented it at the journal Cortex, and he's one of the co-founders of PCIRR, which is pretty exciting for me. And the point here is to address a paradox. So which part of a research study do you believe should be beyond your control as a scientist? So like, is that the intro, the methods, the results, or the discussion? The correct answer is results. But then which part of a research study do you believe is most important for advancing your career? And fortunately, that's also the results. And what's best for research in this case, which is not to touch the results, is in competition then with what's best for researchers in terms of producing lots of great results. And so the register report format can really address this because there are a number of other questionable research practices that come up when we put researchers under pressure to get great results. So it can result in lack of replication, low statistical power, selective reporting in multiple places, publication bias, lack of data sharing, and changing the hypothesis after you have your results. So the solution is to make results a dead currency in the evaluation of research quality, which results register reports does. So peer community and register reports, we started it because we didn't have there was nothing out there that had everything we wanted, that we wanted to innovate for register reports. So we made peer community and register reports, and we went nuts on innovations, and we're still doing innovations. I mean, I'm just really excited about this because it's opening up the world of register reports to more fields, qualitative research, you know, people, it's not just for science, it's for everyone. So 6 innovations that we made were offering programmatic register reports. So stage one register report, the pre-study write-up, can lead to many stage 2 manuscripts. So you might have one theory that you're using to test a variety of different experiments. And so instead of writing one register report for each of these experiments, you just write one register report, and then you can have multiple articles resulting from this one. So that saves time. Another time saver is you can schedule the review process. So if you submit a 1-page snapshot, at least 6 weeks before when you want to submit your full stage 1 report, we'll schedule the reviewers in advance, and so they can turn around the peer review time faster. We actually train our editors, which we call recommenders. They have to pass a test to be able to handle the register reports at PCIRR. To my knowledge, no journal offers this. So we thought it was really important, and people are responding really well to it and appreciating the education. So the peer review is undertaken independently of a journal. And the cool part here is that if you can leave your peer-reviewed pre-registration, your peer-reviewed preprint at the preprint server, it's peer-reviewed, or you can submit it to a journal if you want to. And at PCIRR, we have about 20 what we call PCIRR friendly journals, where they will automatically accept your anything accepted by PCIRR. So if you want it to go into one of these 20 journals, you can. But here, instead of shopping your register report around to all these different journals, and some of them don't even offer register reports, then you just get the peer review happening in one place. It saves a lot of reviewer time. And then you choose the journal you want to put it in, if you want to put it in a journal. The authors can choose whether the reviewers must sign the reviews or whether it's optional. Some journals require that all, like F1000 Research requires that all reviewers have to sign. And so if you know in advance that you want to target a particular journal, you can align the PCIRR review process with your target. And we explicitly state and address the level of bias in the register report with the taxonomy of bias control, which I'll tell you about a bit more in a minute. So how it works is that you put your register report at a repository, you submit the URL to your register report at the PCIRR website, it undergoes peer review, you revise and resubmit, and eventually it likely gets recommended, which is accepted. Then you conduct your study, you put your preprint at a preprint server, so your final write-up. You submit that URL to PCI. It undergoes peer review, revisions, and then it's recommended. And the cool part about PCI is where the editor writes recommendation text about why, like how this process went for this article and what is the interesting thing about this article. It's actually really cool. It's like a letter of recommendation for each article. I found it actually useful. So it's recommended you update your article at the preprint server, and it links to your peer review history and recommendation, which is citable, and you can then submit it to a journal if you like. We select based on scientific validity and not subjective impact. So here's the level of bias taxonomy that I wanted to show you, and I'll show you this through the recommender test, the editor test we have our editors go through. This is one of the questions on the test, and so let's just walk through this. So suppose that PCIR receives a stage 1 manuscript proposing a study in which the data that will be used to answer the question have been accessed and partially observed by the authors. The authors also certify that they have not yet sufficiently observed the key variables within the data set to be able to answer the question. Is this submission likely to be eligible for consideration? Yes, provided additional steps are taken to control risk of bias, or no, the risk of bias in this scenario is too high for PCIR. Well, the correct answer is yes, we can handle that because we have these levels of bias, and you just have to declare what your level of bias is. So level 6 is where the data do not exist at all before you get pre-study acceptance. So you haven't conducted the study, you have no data to look at all. And then if you're down here at level 1, you've got data collected, you've seen the results. Like, think about it in terms of like a long-term study, right? You've got a long-term database, data are coming in year after year after year, and you've seen like the large columns of maybe 10,000 rows of data, and if the data is there, but maybe you have a new hypothesis you want to ask of this data set. You can do that as long as you haven't done the analysis you're proposing to do yet. So you, as long as you haven't done that, then you can have a registered report and just declare your bias level to be 1. So if at any point, like let's say I submit my registered report at level 6, I haven't collected any data yet, but I have this like non-negotiable start date for data collection. My birds, their breeding season stops and I've got to start collecting data now. Then I just notify the editor at PCIR or what level I'm dropping down to, my submission is dropping down to. And so this can be really useful for a variety of making registered reports more flexible for people. Okay, so changing to an inclusive model for academia. Well, we need to make things free to read and publish. We need to implement anti-racist, anti-sexist policies, and we need to actively recruit based on potential, not prestige. And we're doing that at PCIR through recruiting articles based on registered reports, so they're potential, not prestige, because there are no results associated with the registered reports when we accept them. It's free to read and publish at PCI, and at PCIR, I've been implementing, so I assigned myself the role of being in charge of recruiting the editors and the managing board. And what I've been doing is testing out ideas for how I can implement anti-racist, anti-sexist policies. So some of the things we've been doing are inviting people from groups who are traditionally underrepresented in academia first, finding what I call invisible people. So I've discovered that people in a lot of countries who are faculty at universities, the universities don't necessarily have a tradition of putting their faculty on the university website. And a lot of these faculty don't have Google Scholar profiles and don't list themselves in databases. And so how do you find these people? You know, it takes me a lot of time to find just 10 people to invite, but it's been so worth it and just eye-opening in terms of differences in how academia works in different countries. I invite people in batches, so only when a batch has diversity do I then send out the invitations. And we emphasize that we'll train and help people with English when requested. So I've worked in Spanish and in German, which are not my native languages, and I know how hard it is to do that. And so the idea that we would discriminate against people because they aren't native English speakers is another way that biases can really creep in. And so my goal right now is to strive for a majority minority, which is kind of a ridiculous thing to say because what we're talking about, the minority in academia, are actually the majority of people in the world. It's just academia that has this selection funnel. So these are some of the things we're doing at PCIRR, and I'd love to open things up for discussion right now. And
hi, everyone. My name is Maria, and I am from the library. And we are co-hosting this. And thank you so much, Dr. Logan. That was really, really interesting. I think what we want to do now is move on to Wikus van Zyl, who is the editor and manager of our UJ Press, and he has a short presentation. And then I think we will open up for questions. I did see a couple of hands go up already. So we have seen those hands, and we will come back to you in a minute. But let's hand over to Wikus. And Wikus, thank you so much for stepping in at such short notice. We are really grateful that you could be with us this evening. So over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, colleagues. Just shortly about me, I'm Wikus van Zyl. I'm the manager of UJ Press. We have 18 open access journals, and we have a list of open access titles. 80% of our list is open access, and some of our titles are published diamond and some are published gold open access. So I'm going to share a bit of our experiences with peer reviews. At the moment, I've got 64 book publications in peer review, and some of these titles require me to contact at least 30 peer reviewers in order to get a peer review. So it's quite an involved process. So firstly, regarding the economics and politics of peer review, one, funding is an issue. Incentivizing reviewers is the next issue that we can discuss. The power dynamics in peer review is something that's topical. And then how to ensure fair and equitable dissemination of knowledge. So firstly, the cost of peer review. Peer reviewers mostly invest their time and effort into the peer review process for either very little or no remuneration. But peer review is an essential part of the publishing process in terms of quality control. And there is some prestige and networking benefits for the reviewers, but in South Africa specifically, the peer review is mostly double blind, which makes that impossible. And then there is a way through Publons to offer official recognition for peer reviewers for the work that they're doing. And that is linked to publishing platforms like the Open Journal System and the Open Monograph Press. So journals and publishers' role in the peer review process. Firstly, scholarly journals, editors and publishers mostly conduct a peer review process. Subscription fees and article processing charges cover the cost of this peer review process, but costs are often unaffordable and could lead to the exclusion of certain research. And then the Diamond Open Access model is a possible solution to this, but the business model is still problematic because there are costs involved in publishing. Then it is also often very difficult to find suitable reviewers who are willing to perform a peer review. Like I mentioned, in some of the books, I need to contact at least 30 people to get 2 or 3 reviews. We also require at least 2 reviews in order to proceed. And it's always important to make sure that the reviews go to the authors, that they make the changes, and that the revised manuscript goes back to the peer reviewers to give final approval to ensure that that whole workflow is concluded successfully. Then regarding the gatekeeping role of peer review. So peer review is a gatekeeping mechanism that determines the validity and publishability of research. And it's so important to conduct this process responsibly to ensure that the right research is published, the good quality, and that it's equitable. So also, the publication process could influence the careers and funding opportunities that researchers have. So it's a very important role. Then also it could shape the overall research trends, and it could very often be skewed towards the global north based on the reviewers chosen and also the publications chosen. Then regarding this, there's potential bias and how to ensure diversity in peer review. So the potential biases that could exist in peer review process include gender, race, and institutional biases, where certain voices and perspectives could be marginalized or exclusive. And as we mentioned previously, economically, there's also an exclusionary element to that. Then the double-blind peer review is a solution, but it's sometimes also problematic because in smaller disciplines, the reviewer often knows who the authors are because it's so small, the field. And also the authors very often know who the reviewer is, even if you do conduct the process double-blind. Then certain bodies have made best practice documents available, ensuring that the review process is conducted according to the best industry best standards. The one is ASAF, the National Scholarly Book Publishers Forum, and their best practices are mainly based on book publishing. And then the ASAF National Scholarly Editors Forums, best practices are based on the journal publishing process. AU Presses also made best practices available, and those best practices are for books and for journals. And there are various other best practices as well that ensure that the peer review process is conducted equitably and fairly. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Vikas. That was very short and to the point and helpful in our thinking. So I would like to open up now for questions. If anybody has questions, and I did see a number of hands go up. Tapiwa, you have your hand raised if you would like to ask your question.
Thank you. Thank you to the presenters. Mine is just a quick one. I think I got to the tail end of the previous presentation, but I found it quite useful because I was at the same time visiting the PCI website. Are there any plans for including other fields like business?
Yeah, great question. So the great part about Peer Community In is that if you want to start a peer community in your field, you can. So there are instructions at the PCI website for how you can do this. Write a little application, talk to the founders of Peer Community In, and they kind of walk you through the process. And then the representatives across all the PCIs, so each PCI has a representative. I'm the representative for PCI-RR. We get together and we vote on whether that can become a PCI or not, and it always gets voted yes. So yeah, it's really it's a researcher-run community. So if you have research you want to get done through that community, you can start it. So yeah, it's a really exciting time. At the moment, I don't think there is one in business. There is one in organizational studies, but it's open to you to go ahead and start it up.
Hello, my question is directed to Dr. Logan. So I pick up three main key components in how you are running your plan. And one of them is about registered report, pre-registering. Two is about peer review and who are the peer who can review the others. And the other part is about the eventual kind of, publishing. So I have kind of three questions related to each one of them. So for the other part is the preprint kind of, sorry. So for the registration of the plan, I mean, I can see the applicability regarding the quantitative kind of analysis, because I mean, a lot of problem we see and a lot of issues we've seen is the p-hack and all that is really about you changing your data analysis method afterwards. And I mean, that process, I mean, we've seen actually it's being implemented in medicine, whatever, for a while, which is successful. My question is more about, what about, I mean, you actually mentioned about the qualitative kind of studies, or I'm thinking also, actually, lots of us also write completely conceptual papers which have no methodology to start with. So my question would be, and I mean, going back to the qualitative kind of studies is, I mean, by nature, it is flexible and it is actually your thinking of data analysis would change after data collection. So how I'm kind of trying to be, thinking practically how the pre-registration process can take that into consideration. So that's for the registration part. And then for the preprint part, I mean, again, that practice has been there for a while. And one of the issues that I know it differs from field to field, but one of the issues we've been kind of laughing when we are, seeing that is so-called self-plagiarism. Okay, so the question is, when you publish something on preprint and then you send it to the journal afterwards, you are accused of being self-plagiarism. I mean, again, that is a whole debate on itself, but that's the common practice, at least from what I know in social science in this country. Okay, I mean, in other places, I'm not too sure. I know there has been lots of discussions on it. And one of the rationale from the journals, I kind of buy into half, I think is about if this thing has been preprinted, which is available publicly, why should we publish it again? Because it's already publicly available. So what's the journal get? I mean, that's going back to the model and money and all that story. So I'm kind of curious to hear what you might think in terms of if a material, I understand sometimes you work on it and it will be, revised or it will be different. But often the kind of requirement we hear from journals in terms of self-plagiarism is that it needs to be less than 15 or 20%, which almost means that you need to completely rewrite the whole thing, which, I mean, if it's preprint, it's basically not possible. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that particular part. And the last part is about peer review. And so I'm really, I mean, you didn't talk too much in that presentation, but I'm really curious to hear who are the peers in your thinking, because that, from what I know, is one of the struggles for most of the journals when we talk about, the whole process, is to find a peer. I mean, that's also echoed in Viggo's presentations. And I suppose on one hand, I mean, we can call everyone is a peer. I mean, you are the people doing the research in the field, but there are different kinds, I mean, different qualities, different people at different levels. Some of them are early, some of them have been there for a while. Some, like, how do you see the word of peer? Who are the peer, and how do you select peer? And also about, I mean, if we think about two people review one, say manuscript, then, I mean, we've been seeing that practice used quite often now, is also if you submit something, you're being asked to review, but that's only one. You still need to double because you need two reviewers. So how do you do that math, and how do you find those people? I'm really curious. Thank you.
Wow. Okay, let's see. My memory is not super good, so I might have to ask you to repeat a couple of questions, but I'll go to number one first, which was about doing registered reports with qualitative research. That was one of the exciting things that we were able to do with these innovations at PCI. It made registered reports more flexible so that qualitative researchers could do registered reports if they felt like it would be useful for them. And so we actually have had now quite a few qualitative registered reports. And it's really amazing because our authors, recommenders, and reviewers ended up getting together and writing a primer on how to write a registered report for qualitative research. And so you can find the link at our website, PCIRR, and if you go to the About page, the link is farther down. But so yeah, it's been pretty exciting. And so for some qualitative researchers, it might not be useful, but for others it might. In terms of, you don't have to know everything in advance, you don't have to have a hypothesis, you don't have to run statistics, but sometimes it can be useful to just say, here's what my plan is, here's what I'm investigating. As I go through the process, I'm going to be making these decisions, and this is how my decision tree would be. So yeah, it seems like it's a possibility now, and some people are finding it useful. The second piece was about, preprints, and some journals not allowing preprints to be published in their journal. So just on a broad level, there is a database called Sherpa Romeo, and it lists which journals accept preprints. And so at PCI, specifically, the PCIs and PCI-RR specifically, all have PCI-friendly journals, which means that they will either consider your article without giving a further peer review, or they will automatically accept without giving further peer review. And they know that the research is being conducted through the preprint server, so they accept that, no problem. So in terms of protecting you in your articles in the field you want to publish in the journals you want to publish in, and then it's a matter of communicating with the journal and seeing if they would be interested in becoming PCI interested or PCI friendly, to ensure that you won't be in the situation where they think a preprint is plagiarism. That's really frustrating. So there's a way around that at PCI. Your third question, right, was about peer reviewers and who are the peer reviewers. Yes, so we require a minimum across all PCIs, a minimum of 2 peer reviewers for each article. And what we're finding is that it's about the same in terms of peer reviewer acceptance rates at PCI versus at journals. So a lot of us have been editors at other journals, and so we're able to just like anecdotally say, yeah, it takes me as long to get peer reviewers through PCI as it does at journals. Who are the peers? So, you know, PCI is we're just a bunch of researchers. So we were the peer reviewers of the articles at the journals, and we're the peer reviewers of the articles at PCI, and we're also the editors at both places. So it's just us, except we're taking back control of the process and academia in our lives. And it feels like, to me at least, it feels really empowering. So I hope that I got all 3 questions. If not, please let me know.
I think you did really well. I noted the questions down, and we'll go back to you, Prof. Key, should you want more clarity. But just following on from Prof. Key's questions and remarks, we have another question which says, to follow up on Prof. Key's remarks regarding peers and journals, how are journals responding to PCI, and do they consider you? So I don't know if you've got something a little bit more you'd like to add there.
Yeah, so if I just take a look at the peer community in website, I'm just going to look at how many, oh, right. So we've got 100 PCI friendly journals. So yes, journals across all fields that we have represented at PCI, at the different PCIs, are considering the articles and oftentimes automatically accepting them. And in terms of do they consider us, in terms of PCI-RR, it's become the premier place to do registered reports. And this is because journals don't really have the expertise and capacity that we do, where we train everyone and we have all this support for all of our recommenders. And, you know, if you submit a registered report to PCI-RR, it opens up possibilities across now our 31 PCI-RR friendly journals, which will automatically accept the articles. So journals are very interested in what we're up to, and it takes their workload away. And I think, I forget who mentioned it, but yeah, if we do end up, if the author does want to put their article at a journal, they end up paying the APCs, and it's ridiculous because the peer review process didn't happen at that journal. So what are they charging for? And, you know, sometimes we talk about this with the journals, like, do you want to give a discount on the APC because the peer review process happened at PCI? And so far we haven't seen that happening, but it ends up being about the author's choice about where they want to put the article, and or leave it as a preprint, which is also an option.
Great, thank you. Let me see if there are any other questions, either from the floor or online. Just see, I don't have anything further in the chat. Thank you so much for putting the qualitative researchers in the chat. So I have a further question for you. You talk about the idea of publishing for free. And one of the things that really intrigued me was the idea of the language editing. So for a journal that I'm the editor of, one of the our biggest expense is language editing, because we really try to encourage as many people in the Global South as possible to publish in our journal. So the vast majority of people that publish with us are not first language English speakers. And so everything has to go through language editing. And actually that is the kind of key cost of our journal. And so how do you do language editing for free to people that are part of this network?
Yeah, in terms of what I was mentioning, I to see how that was not clear very much at all. I was talking specifically about the recommenders. We'll help them with the English. So what happens when an article is recommended at a PCI? The recommender writes the recommendation text. And so we help them with that recommendation text. And so it's not at the article level. We are discussing across PCIs how we could potentially incorporate non-English languages. And it's a process that's it's a discussion in process. Feasibly, we aren't there yet because, yeah, I can see where it is a very large cost for you. I'm curious about how the, these AI programs that are coming up, and how they can potentially help with translation. But ideally, we would be doing the whole peer review process in other languages as well. Because I think about myself as a native English speaker, and I'm trying to interpret reviewer comments in English on my articles. And sometimes I have to ask multiple team members to help me, is this what this person means? I don't understand. And I can just imagine what it would be like for someone who wasn't working in their native language. So I agree that this is an issue, and we're talking about it, but we have not solved that at PCI yet.
Well, it's one of those wicked problems that we will, I'm sure, continue to work with. So the next question, and I'm sorry, I don't see any other questions or other hands, so I am going to just jump in with the next question. And that is, you spoke a lot about making the publishing process free, and I'm not quite sure, how that happens. So, I fully appreciate and understand that, a lot of the big publishers are making enormous amounts of money off academics who are the people who are actually doing all the work. And I really don't understand why we now have to pay APCs. And you were saying that so many of the journals are free. Well, I don't know if that factors in how much libraries and universities are paying to the big publishers in the back end. So it appears to be free, but isn't actually. So maybe if you want to talk a little bit more about the idea of how do we get to a place where the production of information becomes free.
Mm-hmm. So the 70% of open access journals being free, having no APCs, there are no hidden contracts there with those particular journals. So there were no costs to publish or read. So
sorry. So the 70%, is the 70% of the articles that are linked to PCI?
No, that was a general fact. It was from an article, and I would have to look back at the slide what the citation was for that article. I think it was across the sciences, across science journals, probably. And it was probably like a meta-analysis of DOAJ, the Directory for Open Access Journals. I think that was probably where the data came from, but I would have to look at that again. So the economic model for Peer Community In is published on their website. So they share how much it costs to run the PCIs in total and per PCI, and they really break down the costs. So there's always going to be a cost for web hosting because we have the the preprint server, hosts the PDF. It's very cheap to host a PDF. I think something like 16 cents in terms of like US dollars or something like that. And then the peer community in website hosts the peer review history, and that hosting is also extremely cheap. So that's in like those are like the costs of like the hardware, So in addition to that, it's paying for the web hosting. But aside from these kinds of costs, there isn't a whole lot that has to happen, right? So one example is Peer Community Journal. So Peer Community In started their own journal, and in this journal, they will publish any article that has been recommended across any PCI. And so they're doing, like, the authors are responsible for doing the formatting. And so that is on the authors. It's not a cost that we incur. I think once a project gets running, like PCI in the beginning is more costly in terms of like web developers had to make the website and the interface and the submission website. And we're still making innovations, so we're still paying a lot in web developer costs, but that's a startup cost, not an ongoing cost. So yeah, I encourage people, and I can find the economic model. Here we go. I will post the link to the economic model, and so you can see.
Great. Thank you so much. And that's come through. So we have another hand. I think it's in the room. Anthony, I see your hand if you want to ask the question.
All right. Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much, Corinne. I really, really enjoyed your talk. I want to push you a little bit more. Let's imagine a space where we have academics such as yourselves doing the peer reviewing. What would be the role of journals be, and why would we still need to pay money? I understand the economics of publishing. We had a session around it, but from the vacuum that you're now feeling, the void you're now feeling, and the work that you're now uptaking, how do you reimagine a new space in which publishing can happen? I think in short, that's what I'd like to know from you. Thank you.
Anthony, exactly. I mean, we don't need journals, and that's kind of the long-term vision for PCI. We need peer-reviewed research, and we can do that using preprint servers, and the same peer reviewers who are editing at journals and peer reviewing at journals, and we just took the power back into our hands. So yeah, you kind of nailed it.
Thank you so much. And I find that idea really quite exciting. Okay, we have another question. It's from UJ Library. So I'm not quite sure who is asking the question. If you want to go ahead.
Maria, I have a follow-up question. Can I ask?
Yes, go for it.
It's actually both related to what you said. On one hand, I found it actually quite surprising that you spend and you take the cost of language editing into the journals, because my experience, again, I'm not sure whether it's the difference between disciplines or field. I mean, it's the authors who bear that cost. I mean, when we submit, we will be asked to provide a letter. Sometimes I actually found it ridiculous, but anyway, we will be asked to provide a letter that the manuscript has been edited. Or otherwise, it's either by a language editor or by a first language speakers. I only see it, though, for the certain South African journals. Not all of them, but it's only South African journals. And I always never see this kind of requirement from so-called international journals. I'm just wondering, like, is it, and I also kind of thinking of other experiences where I find reviewers, actually some of them, so I think they were doing a little bit too much, but they were actually editing my language. So I'm wondering, like, is there a need for the journals to actually bear the cost of language editing by yourself? I'm not sure which way is better, but I'm just wondering why, like, you guys decide to take over that particular cost. My other question and kind of comment is back to the publisher. So thinking of economics. So generally in economics, what we say is that when there's sufficient competitions, then the cost will drive down, but the price will go down. So one of the issues I think with the whole publishing space seems to be that it's getting bigger and bigger monopoly and getting bigger and bigger concentration, which again, it's not unique in this space, but this seems to be one of the big issues. So the question there is that one is that, is it possible to have some ways, I suppose what Dr. Logan is doing is to kind of provide some kind of competitions. But my question is, how did we get to here? Like, I suppose at some point, those big journals or those big publishers are so big, like how they become so big, becoming the monopoly almost in the field. And related to that is, are there not any regulations? I mean, in the business world, I mean, if things become too big, I mean, they will be regulated or they will be, antitrust or anti-whatever. But what's happening in this space? Is it also because it's not regulated enough? I don't know. I'm just throwing it back to you.
Yeah, so Dr. Logan, if you want to go first, and I'll give some ideas after.
Okay, I'll let you take the whole language and cost of language, because that's your area. Yeah, the history of how journals came about in the first place, there are a couple of really interesting articles on this, and they're published in some UK newspapers, and I'm trying to remember which one. Basically, the first one was about, I remember his first name, Richard something or other, and he created the idea of journals and this system of how you can get money from people for doing nothing, having nothing to do with the production of the things you're actually publishing. And so he turned it into this industry by like separating people out and making separate journals. So each journal was its own like money factory. And then he ended up, I think, founding Elsevier, and then went bankrupt, and then someone else bought Elsevier. It's I might be getting a lot of facts wrong, but there is an article on this from a UK newspaper. And then in terms of is there no regulation on the competition? Yeah, there isn't. And there is a researcher in the UK, Martin, and I'm spacing on his last name. He actually brought the issue up to, I think, a UK regulatory board, governmental board, to say like, this is a problem. We need to like insert some kind of competition regulation here. And I don't know how well that was received, or if anyone did anything about it. Certainly the publishers have a lot invested, these particular publishers have a lot invested in keeping things the way they are, and they have a lot of money, so they can probably maintain their control through lawyers and things like this. But it's a fascinating idea. So like the history of publishing is an interesting topic to have a look at. Maria, do you want to take the language?
Yeah, so our language editing that we do for our journal is very much part of a mission to try and create a space where academics in the Global South are not held back because of questions of language. We really want to give as much space to people as possible and as many opportunities. And when things go out for peer review, we do put a little notice with it, often saying, even if this isn't of the most perfect English, please consider the content. Because, as you were saying earlier, we work in a very unequal world in which we tend to think of some people's ideas as being more important. And very often when things are packaged in elegant language, they are seen as being a better idea, when that is often not the case. It's just that the person used big words in, grammatically correct sentences. And yeah, so for our journal, this is a big part of trying to create a space of equal access for everybody. But, like many things, it does also then come with a cost. And then also just going back to the publishing. So yeah, one of the big things that a lot of the consortia are trying to do all over the world, and possibly the consortia of libraries in the UK just is the most successful at this, is to negotiate with the big publishers and to negotiate better deals, because the big publishers are actually a handful of publishers, all trying to make lots of money. And it truly is the most remarkable business model, where you get people to produce things for free, and now you also get them to pay to make this stuff that they have produced for free available to other people, because of the particular academic world in which we live. And these publishers are really good at working this particular system and cycle. And I think that there has been some success from some of the consortia, but by no means enough. I think, articles or journals like Nature that can charge 120,000 Rand for one article, I think we're nowhere near where we should be. And I'm very interested in your stat of 70% of journals are free. That's not really what we're seeing in South Africa in the negotiations with the big publishers. Many more journals are not open access, or if they are open access, it's open access with a transformative agreement that a university or a library of a university, etc., will pay, so that authors can publish for free in those different journals. So I think that, the work that you guys are doing is really exciting, because how else do we get our journals out of the hands of these big publishers who do provide something, as Vikas was saying, as a publishing organization, you make it much easier for articles to be found, for example, you do the layout, etc. But that by no means justifies the kinds of costs of these journals, either to read or in some cases to publish in those journals. Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands. Anthony, from the group that are in the library, are there any other questions that people might have?
I think I also have a question about the results of the journal. I think normally what we see in the results, like we trust the results, but then last week there was some told me there was a professor at Stanford who was under fire for data manipulation. And who are the people who are making sure that the data that's used for your research is actually valid? Like, how do we ensure that the data can be trusted?
So I'm going to hand that one over to you.
Yeah.
Dr. Logan.
Yeah, it's becoming a real issue. One way that people are trying to address that is by requiring open data. So you publish the data. That can get tricky for sensitive data for humans, data on humans where you need to anonymize things, or for species that are endangered and need to not have geographic identifiers associated with the data. Yeah, it's tricky. I mean, one of the reasons for doing a register report could reduce the practices of making up data because the results don't matter, right? It's already been accepted. So that could be a useful selection pressure to release the pressure for trying to get certain kinds of data. But otherwise, I know that, it's kind of concerning across the board. And I don't know that there are good solutions yet. I've heard talk of using AI to help identify patterns in people's data sets that should maybe occur too often to be random chance. I don't know that, and then there's been talk about then the researchers that are making up the data could be using other AI to try and counteract that. So it could be like this arms race. And so, yeah, I don't know that there's a good solution on the horizon. We would certainly need to be reviewing as reviewers and editors the data as well. And that is something that we encourage people to look at, and it's becoming more popular in more fields. I was just a reviewer for an article that's published, or a recommender for an article that's showing people how to write code for peer reviewers to review. And they're talking about running all the models and testing the code and making sure they can reproduce the results. So that could be another way, as this becomes more popular, to review code that could potentially start to get at the, I guess, falsified data where people who are running the code might start to see some anomalies. So yeah, it's not, as far as I know, a very well under control in terms of like, what can we do about this?
Thank you so much. So I would like to suggest that we really have come to the end of our questions and answers. And I would like to hand over to my colleague, Dr. Teller, who has been very involved in setting up all of these seminars that we've had. And he is the head of the Future of Diplomacy at the Institute for the Future of Knowledge at the University of Johannesburg. And so over to you, Dr. Teller.
Thank you, Chair, for your gracious introduction. Over the past 3 weeks, the University of Johannesburg's Institute for the Future of Knowledge, in collaboration with the library, has hosted a 3-part seminar series titled Democratizing Knowledge, the Politics and Economics of Knowledge Production and Consumption. This series has delved into the dynamic landscape of knowledge accessibility, exploring the intricate interplay between politics, economics, knowledge production, and consumption, particularly in Africa and the broader global South. The first seminar addressed the challenges that academics and students in Africa and the global South face when trying to access scholarly journals. The second seminar examined the racial inequalities ingrained in academic publishing. Today's event has explored the transformative efforts of the peer community which champions inclusivity and open access. We believe that this series has effectively exposed our participants to both perceived and actual racial inequalities in publications, as well as the possibilities of democratizing knowledge and transforming traditional publishing practices within the complex dynamics of politics and economics. On behalf of the Institute for the Future of Knowledge and the University of Johannesburg's library, I wish to express our gratitude to our esteemed panelists for contributing to the success of this seminar series. I also extend our thanks to our participants for their lively engagement throughout this series. Lastly, I want to acknowledge the exemplary work of the organizing team from the University of Johannesburg's Institute for the Future of Knowledge and the library. Thank you, everyone. A luta continua, Victoria Asata.
Thank you so much, Dr. Teller. What a wonderful way to end what has been a very dynamic and interesting set of seminars and webinars. So just from my side as well to say thank you so much to everybody for participating, especially today, Dr. Logan and Mr. Vickers van Zyl, and to everybody that's participated. It's been wonderful to get to know some people, to chat to others, and to exchange so many different ideas. And in many ways, I think this is the beginning of ongoing conversations. And I, for one, have been really inspired. And just a big thank you to the colleagues who've been working at the back end, especially Theo and our other members of the team. Thank you so much for making all of this possible. Goodbye, everybody, and I look forward to seeing many of you again, because I'm quite sure that we will be doing some further things together with the Institute for Future Knowledge. Stay well, everyone. Goodbye.
The University of Johannesburg, the future reimagined.